We're remembering Singapore's first Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, here on Channel News Asia. Stay with us.
In 10 years, let's have fishing in the Singapore River.
The water was really poisoned, poison black.
It can be done.
And it was, beating the odds to transform Singapore, defying even nature to do so, building a nation. Part 1 of Time Nor Tide, Remembering Lee Kuan Yew on Channel News Asia.
After we became independent, the point which he always reiterated was never do to the minorities in Singapore what happened to us when we were a minority in Malaysia. He knew how to advise, how to guide, and he knew when to let things go and to take a new direction. What will we miss of him? He's a father, he's the father of the nation. He made this place.
Merdeka! Lagi sekali yang bersemangat merdeka!
Lee Kuan Yew braced himself early on in life to face history's tumultuous tides full on. From the hardships of war, with a fledgling nation in tow, he leapfrogged decades, pushing past history's disruptive currents.
And we will, and faster than they can.
He survived its undertow.
This is your life and mine. I've spent a whole lifetime building this.
And brought Singapore to where it is today, without letting time nor tide deter him. the young Lee Kuan Yew, the Japanese occupation was the single most important event to shape his political ideology. The deprivation, cruelty, and humiliation that the war wreaked on people revealed to Lee that to control one's destiny, one had to gain power. Lee was named Kuan Yew, which literally means light and brightness, but which also means bringing great glory to one's ancestors.
We changed the complexion of Singapore.
On September 16, 1923, Lee was born to English-educated parents Lee Chin-kun and Chua Jim-nyo, and was given the English moniker Harry by his paternal grandfather. Lee continued the family tradition of being educated in English. He read law at the University of Cambridge after excelling as a student at Raffles College. His experience of being treated as a colonial subject when he was in England in the late 1940s fueled his interest in politics and sharpened his anti-colonial sentiments. Lee later said, "I saw the British people as they were. They treated you as colonials, and I resented that. I saw no reason why they should be governing me. They're not superior. I decided when I got back, I was going to put an end to this."
We were born in a time of tumultuous change, where the world that we knew it was crumbling, was collapsing. When I was a little boy, the British Empire was supposed to last 1,000 years. And so everybody thought. Even when the Japanese went to war against China, we thought, well, that's far away. And we never believed the Japanese would attack Malaya and Singapore and capture us. And we literally saw a whole society disintegrate. It collapsed overnight. And we were serfs, to be trampled on, to do their bidding. And that did something to a whole generation and said, no, why? This is my life, my country. I have something to say.
Lee's political life began right after he returned to Singapore in 1950. Acting as legal advisor and negotiator, he represented the postal workers who were fighting for better pay and working conditions. He was soon appointed by many more trade unions, some of which were controlled by pro-communists. Together with these pro-communists, Lee and other anti-colonialists formed the People's Action Party in 1954. It was a marriage of convenience to overthrow the British. To win power, Lee needed the support of the masses. That meant reaching out to the Chinese educated, Singapore's majority.
It's very interesting how he came back. You can see the political determination to master the languages so that he can communicate with the people whom he will have to appeal to support him to the position of power to do good. And the determination by which he learned his Chinese, which we had none before.
Lee had taken 8 months of Mandarin classes in 1950. He renewed his Mandarin learning 5 years later at the age of 32. Within a short time, he had mastered the language sufficiently to address public audiences.
勇敢的人敢面对现实，面对事实。这个国家是新加坡公民的。伊要摕咱的5000万块，因为咱有钱讲，互因，咱讲我要去会使借。
In the mid-1950s, riots broke out that fueled tensions between the local government and the communist sympathizers in the Chinese community. A few pro-communist members of the PAP were arrested. Leading the PAP, Lee fought for their release and ran a campaign against corruption in the 1959 elections for the Legislative Assembly. The party won by a landslide. Lee achieved what he had set out to do. Singapore was self-governing, and he was Prime Minister. He had acquired power, but others with a different political agenda contested it. Leading Singapore meant breaking ranks with some of his anti-colonial allies, the pro-communists. Lee said of them, they were not crooks or opportunists, but formidable opponents, men of great resolve, prepared to pay the price for the communist cause.
You know, we faced the ultimate when we decided to fight the communists. That is painful death, you know. If they ever win, they'll pull my fingernails one by one. We've got enough gumption in us. Having decided to take our lives in our own hands and fight for what we believe it is right, I say we'll fight to the end, regardless.
Lee and his colleagues knew they were in for a hard fight with the pro-communists. He had seen up close how the pro-communist left-wing leaders like Lim Chin Siong could mobilize the masses through riots and strikes to paralyze a government. In the battle, it was Lee's leadership that counted most.
His leadership did make a difference. I cannot imagine, for example, some of his team people surviving the politics of 1961 to 65. I cannot imagine them surviving without him.
We have so much at stake. We have gone so far to secure the country. I say rally around and keep these evil forces. You see, they are so ashamed of themselves, they have switched the light off. Look at that. They are cowards, that's what they are. Cowards. They switched the lights off. Look at that. Are these men who are going to lead you to peace and prosperity or to ruination and perdition? Look at them.
The battle lines were drawn sharply over the proposal for merger with Malaysia. The non-communists were for it, and the pro-communists were against it. There were compelling economic reasons for merger, but Lee was also clear about its political necessity. To him, merger was absolutely necessary to prevent Singapore and Malaya being slowly engulfed and eroded away by the communists. Lee believed building a common identity between individuals on either side of the causeway would propel them across racial and religious shores and into a common land.
Make the people feel that they are wanted. Not stepchildren or stepbrothers, but one in the family and a very important member of the family.
Mr. Lee was welcomed most warmly in traditional Malay style when he went round 8 islands.
Lee campaigned relentlessly and tirelessly for merger, speaking over the radio and in nearly every corner of Singapore. After an intense public contest with his political opponents, Lee won. Most Singaporeans voted for the union with Malaysia.
City Hall is again the heart of the city-state. Crowds gather around the Padang to await the arrival of the Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, whose day this is.
On September 16th, 1963, which happened to be his 40th birthday, Lee declared Singapore's entry into the Federation of Malaysia.
In the history of a nation, There are moments when great decisions have to be made. Today is such a moment in our lives. We, the people of Singapore, have made our contribution.
But it wasn't always easy for the two sides to work together. Serious differences emerged. Lee wanted a Malaysian Malaysia, where Malays and non-Malays were equal. He would not condone a policy that supported Malay supremacy. Differences mounted, from conflicts between personalities and disagreements about a common market to the PAP's participation in Malaysia's general election. Malaysian politicians considered it a breach of understanding for the PAP to take part in mainland politics. Things came to a head over constitutional rights. Lee addressed the Malaysian Parliament in May 1965 in both English and Malay, laying out his case against communal politics.
Tetapi, jikalau saya di rumah tidak cakap bahasa ibunda saya, takkan saya taat setia kepada Malaysia. Supaya Menteri dari Sarawak, takkan dia kalau balik rumah panjangnya dia cakap bahasanya, dia tak ada taat setia kepada Malaysia. Saya tidak percaya. Dia masih selalu taat setia.
I think it's generally known that he caused a sensation by addressing Parliament in Kuala Lumpur in Raja Malay. He spoke Malay better than the many Malays. They were absolutely astounded, and I was very apprehensive about it. And I was right to be apprehensive too, yes.
The backbenchers were spellbound. They understood every word. That was the turning point. They perceived him as a dangerous man who could one day be the Prime Minister of Malaya. Well, this was the speech that changed history.
When you speak in Parliament, you must speak very carefully. You couldn't make mistake. And he didn't finish the speech. So he asked the speaker to give him, to continue the next day, because Parliament went on recess. So the speaker said, I give you 45 minutes the next morning. But when Parliament began the next morning, speaker didn't allow him to speak. And he stood up, he said, you promised me yesterday, but no. So then we knew that that Malay speech must have some very bad effect on the leadership of the government. I noticed that while he was speaking, the alliance leaders, Tun Abdul Rahman, Tuan Razak, Tan Siew Sin, and the rest, were sitting in front of us. They got a table that sang low and low and low until only their head, because they were embarrassed. This man could speak Malay better than them.
They say they are worried about the Malays. I say, so are we. We want to raise their standard of living. And we will, and faster than they can. And at the end of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, a new generation will grow up that will no longer respond to the special VHF they use. They'll be tuning into the multilingual network. They'll be thinking like us, working like us, trained like us, prepared to live with us like Malaysians. Then we win. And history is on our side.
But it was not to be. Racial riots sparked off a year earlier by what Lee called Malay ultras had already created a deep divide. On August 9th, 1965, Singapore separated from Malaysia.
Every time we look back on this moment when we signed this agreement which severed
Singapore from Malaysia, it will be a moment of anguish. I mean, for me, it is a moment of anguish because all my life, you see, the whole of my adult life,
after we became independent, the point which he always reiterated was never do to the minorities in Singapore what happened to us when we were a minority in Malaysia. He knew how to advise, how to guide, and he knew when to let things go and to take a new direction. What will we miss of him? He's a father, he's the father of the nation. He made this place.
On August 9, 1965, Singapore became an independent state, but not by choice. The island's 2 million people faced an uncertain fate in future. Uncertainty that weighed heavily on one man.
Would you mind if we stop for a while?
My memory is that on the 9th of August, sometime during the course of the morning, he asked me to come over, and I had heard the previous evening that the structure was going to collapse. And then he was under great strain, and he said that Singapore had been hived off, ejected, I forget the exact word he used, from Malaysia, and was now an independent country.
Left with no hinterland and hardly a domestic market to speak of, Singapore's only option was for its leaders to fight hard for its survival.
I have a few million people's lives to account for. And Singapore will survive.
As daunting as the task must have seemed, Lee set his sights on building a country of the future and never veered from that vision.
And we will set the example. This country belongs to all of us. We made this country from nothing, from mud flats. Here we make
the model multiracial society. This is not a country that belongs to any single community. It belongs to all of us. This was a mud flat, swamp. Today, this is a modern city. 10 years from now, this will be a metropolis. Never fear.
But it wasn't easy. Lee and his team soon had another crisis to deal with. In 1968, out of the blue, Britain announced its intention to withdraw its troops from Singapore. Lee now had to confront the prospect of a country without its own security forces, and thousands of workers retrenched from the British bases, joining the already large numbers of unemployed. The late journalist and author Dennis Bloodworth, a resident of Singapore since 1956, recalled Lee's reaction to the British pullout.
He was extremely angry about it and said, well, I'll tell you this. We're going to take over all their lands. Their lands do not belong to them anymore. And I cannot guarantee the safety of British citizens anymore in Singapore. And Goh Keng Swee said to him, now, Kuan Yew, he said, you're starting to sound like a gangster. And Lee Kuan Yew just smiled gently.
Lee's good ties with British leaders led them to extend their departure to the end of 1971. With these military bases contributing 20% to the economy and providing jobs for 70,000 people, this softened the blow to Singapore's economy.
If anybody had suggested at that moment that Singapore would become as prosperous and as remarkable as it has, I don't think nobody would have believed you. And it is to a very large extent due to Lee Kuan Yew that this has happened.
Led by Lee, the team soldiered on to hold Singapore together and make it work. The British naval bases were used to boost the economy, and efforts were made to attract investors to set up industries on former British Army land. To survive what was then a hostile neighborhood, Lee used a two-pronged approach to grow the economy. First, to leapfrog the region and link up with the developed world for both capital and market initiatives. And second, to transform Singapore into a first world oasis in a third world region. With first world standards of service and infrastructure, Lee saw Singapore as the hub for businesses wanting a foothold in the region. Did he ever imagine Singapore would one day enjoy the world's highest per capita income and become a leading business center in Asia? Perhaps. Success he attributed to the confidence of foreign investors drawn to the nation's amicable industrial relations.
He's emphasized that his duty was to find ways and means of getting more jobs for people. And it was also the duty of the labor movement to help their fellow workers find jobs. So for that we needed industrial peace and a certain balance, not exploitation.
The National Trades Union Congress, NTUC, was formed in 1961 when the PAP split.
In the PAP...
Led by David Nair, a founding member of the PAP, the NTUC led Singapore's labour movement away from militant trade unionism to one marked by cooperation. In fact, Singapore was the first in the world to have a tripartite arrangement, where workers, employers and the government came together to discuss general wage levels. Cooperation that contributed significantly to harmonious labour relations and ultimately Singapore's rapid development in the 1970s and 80s.
In government, I've never forgotten that it is in the interest of workers and their unions that we must strive for growth and development. In other words, growth is meaningless unless it is shared by the workers and shared not only directly in wage increases, but indirectly in better homes, better schools, better hospitals, better playing fields, a healthier environment for their families and for their children to grow up.
Singapore's metamorphosis from mudflat to metropolis was not just physical. Equally remarkable was the transformation of the psyche of an entire population. Within the span of a few decades, Singaporeans came to be seen as a people who could get things done. Lee Kuan Yew played a big part in that change. From the word go, he set the pace for excellence. He once told senior civil servants, "I want to make sure every button works, and if it doesn't, when I happen to be around, then somebody is going to be in for a rough time, because I do not want sloppiness."
If he gets a couple of questions thrown at you, you go and work at it straight away and give it to him as quickly as you can. And don't delay, and don't wait 2 days when you can finish by tomorrow, and preferably by today.
Early days we thought that he appeared to be very fierce, very strict. Whenever he came down the constituency, even if he went to the washroom, the floor is dirty, he would shouted. But Mrs. Lee always there. She would not go and interfere, but quietly behind the back the soldier. Don't take it seriously. Don't take it serious. He is like that, right? Just clean it up.
Sprucing up a young nation, however, was not so straightforward. Besides the challenge of ensuring sufficient security for the country's borders, Lee and his team had a more fundamental problem to tackle. They had a housing crisis on their hands.
After we became independent, the point which he always reiterated was never do to the minorities in Singapore what happened to us when we were a minority in Malaysia. He knew how to advise, how to guide, and he knew when to let things go and to take a new direction. What will we miss of him? He's a father of the nation. He made this place.
The 50-story pinnacle on Cantonment Road is an icon in Singapore's half-a-century-old public housing landscape. It is built on the site of one of the earliest public housing projects in the country. Housing in the 50s was a far cry from what it is today. These were Singapore's living conditions when it achieved self-government in 1959. There was a housing crisis. To meet the nation's acute housing shortage, the PAP set up in 1960 the Housing Development Board, simply known today by its acronym HDB. Its aim, to build 10,000 homes a year. Its predecessor, the Singapore Improvement Trust, was highly skeptical the new board would meet its ambitious target. After all, the SIT built only 20,000 flats in its 30-year history.
The expatriates who left the then SIT, predecessor of the Housing Board, doubted whether we could ever do it. And so did the government. So a committee was set up under Professor Lim Tebo to find out whether we have the capability and the material to complete 10,000 houses as planned. Well, when the committee, Lim Tebo's committee, published its report, the Housing Board has already completed 10,000 units of housing. And among the doubts expressed in the report was this, and I quote, "The team showed more enthusiasm than skill."
The stakes were high and the difficulties daunting. The PAP, which just came into power, needed to deliver results fast and gain the trust and confidence of Singaporeans. The HDB's performance was crucial to the PAP's re-election in 1963. It was more than a question of providing affordable homes for people. The social motive to do this was equally compelling. Public housing helped tighten the weave of Singapore's social fabric.
Unless we have a rooted population, unless the people had something to defend. So you ask people to defend all the big houses where the bosses live and they live in houses. I don't think that's tenable. So we decided from the very beginning, everybody must have a home. Every family will have something to defend. And that home must be owner-owned. But they'll have to pay it by installments and over 20, 25 years, even 30 years. And that home we developed over the years into their most valuable asset.
Because of Lee's vision, more than 80% of Singaporeans now live in subsidized pub flats that they can call their own. Singaporeans now had a personal stake in their country that went beyond feelings of patriotism. They had a physical space they could call home, and a vested interest to defend it. National service to defend the country and ensure its borders were safe from external aggression took on a different dimension. After independence, Singapore was left with just 2 battalions of the Singapore Infantry Regiment. There was an urgent need to build a substantial defense force. And so national service was introduced in 1967, with universal conscription making it compulsory for every male Singapore citizen to serve in the armed forces for about 2 years.
We must never forget that our existence as an independent sovereign state cannot be made to depend on the sufferance of others. The most dependable guarantee of independence is a strong SAF. A strong SAF, in turn, depends on the political will to make the effort and pay the price.
National service helps to promote racial harmony too. In multiracial Singapore, English is the common language used by all races. Lee saw early on that English would be a unifier that would give Singapore an edge in the international arena. But he also believed that knowing one's mother tongue would build a sense of belonging to one's roots and increase self-confidence and self-respect. And so he championed bilingualism. But bilingualism, Lee said in retrospect, was his most difficult policy to implement. He later admitted he was wrong to assume that one could be equally fluent in two languages.
Had I known all the difficulties, bilingualism, in 1965, as I know now today, would I have done differently? Yes, in its implementation, not in its policy. I do not regret the stress and the heavy burdens I put, because the other way would have been a destruction of our whole, the chance of building up some form of culture which is worth preserving.
If he did not succeed in bringing through our education system based on bilingual education, we would not have the advantage among other countries to tap on this the China's economic trade. He foresaw this the advantage of having bilingual, so he forced through.
Lee and his team handled issues involving race and religion with sensitivity, knowing how combustible such matters could be. The formative years of the PAP, the battles against communism and extremism, and the racial riots he lived through meant Lee never underestimated the explosive nature of race relations. When it was time to remove the small, dilapidated mosques built on state land, he did so with caution. His plan was to replace these suraus with bigger and better mosques in every housing estate through voluntary contributions from the Malay Muslim community.
So he said he will instruct the civil service to prepare circular for all Malay Muslims working in the government service to donate voluntarily the mosque building fund. And the deduction will be through CPF. And that was a good idea, relatively in sense.
This mosque in Tua Payoh was the first to be built across the island. Today, mosques in Singapore are not only places of worship, but also centers for community bonding, social events, and education.
So the Malays are proud of this because I've got a share in every mosque in Singapore by consider monthly.
Lee also took special interest in ensuring that Singapore's different communities would all have a share in its prosperity. He believed better education was one of the keys to uplifting the Malay community.
I think the most important is that, to me, education. He really wants us to help in that area. In fact, one of those days when he had lunch, he asked us parents to really look after our kids. Be together with them, ensure that they study well, then you can make a good jump. If the quantum jump, they will see the graph moving higher and higher.
Cabinet Minister K. Shanmugam says it would ease politicians in Singapore to appeal to the sentiments of the majority Chinese community to gain political power. But part of the success of Singapore, he feels, is that it had leaders like Lee who shun racial politics.
I think most sensible people in the Indian community, particularly those who went through the earliest struggles, older than me, I think accept this, that we have the space and we have far more liberty and opportunity in sport than we would have been if we were 6% in any other society, including India, where many of the past Indians in Singapore wouldn't have had a chance.
The best thing that MM ever did in this respect was that because of the policies that he and his team put, I never ever felt that I was a minority. I've always grown up thinking of myself as Singaporean and not anything else.
After we became independent, the which he always reiterated was never do to the minorities in Singapore what happened to us when we were a minority in Malaysia. Always make sure that the Malays, that most Indians have their space, can live their way of life, and have full and equal opportunities and are not discriminated against. At the same time, help them to upgrade, improve, move forward. After we became independent, the point which he always reiterated was never do to the minorities in Singapore what happened to us when we were a minority in Malaysia. He knew how to advise, how to guide, and he knew when to let things go and to take a new direction. What will we miss of him? He's a father, he's the father of the nation. He made this place.
Singapore is widely known in the world for being a clean city, both in its environment and governance. It is the least corrupt in Asia, and according to the World Bank, one of the most preferred places in the world to do business. But it was not always graft-free. Corruption was widely prevalent when Singapore was still a British colony. In the 1959 election, the PAP, then the opposition, campaigned against the government's corrupt practices.
I'm convinced we will thrive upon flourishing Ramadan. There is honest, effective government.
The PAP's anti-corruption position resonated well with the voters. When the PAP government took office, Lee and his team turned up in all white as a promise to the people that their leaders will not stand for corruption and will be whiter than white. Over the years, the leadership's zero tolerance for corruption earned Singapore a reputation for having a clean and effective government. No small claim, considering how some countries continue to struggle to keep on the straight and narrow. Establishing the rule of law, public security and safety were fundamental to the success of the PAP. Securities taken as a given in today's Singapore. Lee applied the effort to stay clean to the island's physical transformation as well. From the outset, he was adamant that urban development did not proceed haphazardly. He had seen how a lack of planning had marred other cities and was determined that Singapore did not make the same mistake.
Most other cities or countries would say, well, let's take care of the economic development first, even at the expense of the environment. and then we try to fix the environment. He did not take that stand at all. He wanted to pave the foundation for Singapore to have a first world environment when we become first world economy. So much so that I think after a while, when we reach cross a certain hump in tackling the environmental ills and move into further improvement, the good environment became an economic asset.
I was really struck by how much he was taken up with this idea of the greening of Singapore. He just believed that that having trees and shrubbery, you don't have a concrete jungle around the place. It's not only aesthetically good. I suppose it has something to do with the soul of the Singaporean. Give a certain softness and a certain calmness.
Lee expressed his passion for greening Singapore in practical ways. He planted a tree every year, a tradition he started on June 16, 1963, with the planting of a Mempat sapling. It kicked off an island-wide tree planting initiative and launched Tree Planting Day, a national campaign that helped Singapore earn its garden city reputation. Lee said in his memoirs, "After independence, I searched for some dramatic way to distinguish Singapore from other third world countries and settled for a clean and green Singapore. Greening is the most cost-effective project I've launched." Lee's original vision of a garden city evolved over the years into the concept of a city in a garden, with some 2 million trees planted island-wide. In June 2012, this transformation was celebrated when the breathtaking Gardens by the Bay opened.
This is just one example of how we're transforming Singapore's living environment. It may be a densely populated city, maybe one of the densest in the world, but we are determined that our people should be able to live comfortably, pleasantly, graciously. And not just with good homes, efficient public transport, or safe streets, but also to be in touch with nature, to be never far from green spaces and blue waters.
Lee was not known to be sentimental about buildings or landmarks. He was practical yet ambitious about transforming the nation's landscape, even when it came to defying nature.
In 10 years, let's have fishing in the Singapore River and fishing in the Kallang River. It can be done.
One of Lee's most important initiatives started in 1977. It involved the Singapore River, historically the lifeblood of the economy and the center of commercial activity. The river had been the conduit for Singapore's entrepôt trade, allowing for the movement of goods from the port to the city. Over the years, it had degenerated into a filthy, congested, polluted waterway. The industries along its banks had been dumping sewage and garbage into its waters.
When I was living in Hock Lam Street in Chinatown, I see very few people swimming there. It was full of stench. The water was really poison, poison black. Nobody could even wade through that water. I remembered when I was studying in the secondary school in Canning Seng, I used to walk through South Beach Road and looking at Singapore River, I have to close my nose.
Lee proposed what to everyone was a monumental feat, a cleanup.
Mr. Lee had thought through the plan and envisioned a Singapore which would be clean and green with riverine recreational amenities in the heart of the city. He was confident that the scheme was doable, and it was a question of organizing ourselves and getting the job done.
The Singapore River was reborn. a mammoth task that took 10 years to complete. Today, it is not only glistening again, its banks are bustling with trendy restaurants, clubs and offices.
Singapore had an economic advisor by the name of Dr. Winsemius. He retired, and after we cleaned up the Singapore River, he came back to Singapore, I think at the invitation of the government. And when he heard about the success and that fish has returned to the Singapore River, he went down to the mouth of Singapore River to do some fishing. He caught a fish, and it was a large one. He was surprised, and I was very pleased that he caught a fish. And we didn't put any fish in the river.
The Singapore River, now part of the Marina Reservoir, is a constant reminder of the man who defied time and tide. Its transformation, mirroring the fascinating evolution of a small backwater into a thriving global metropolis. Its currents echo the ebb and flow of one man's life as he turned an impossible dream into reality.
Lee captured the world with his rhetoric.
I know, and from what his discussions were and the questions he asked, he does care.
And made Singapore a nation to watch through his leadership.
He was way up here and I was down here, and I learned a lot from him.
She really enjoyed talking to Lee Kuan Yew, felt she learned a great deal from him.
Putting Singapore on the map. Part 2 of Time Nor Tide on Channel News Asia.
After we became independent, the point which he always reiterated was never do to the minorities in Singapore what happened to us when we were a minority in Malaysia. He knew how to advise, how to guide, and he knew when to let things go and to take a new direction. What will we miss of him? He's a father, he's the father of the nation. He made this place.
You're watching Channel News Asia's continuing coverage out of Singapore on the first of 7 days of official mourning for the country's first Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Mr. Lee died early this morning, aged 91. The hearse carrying his body arrived at the Istana at 1 p.m. local time.
A private family wake is being held at Sri Temasek on the Istana grounds until Tuesday. Meanwhile, many people made their way to the main gate of the Istana to pen condolences and lay cards and flowers. Leong Wai Kit has more.
As the hearse carrying Mr. Lee's body entered the Istana grounds, many stood in line to pay their respects. They honoured him for his contributions and bade farewell to Singapore's founding father.
To pay my last respect to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. When I look around, I think we are quite fortunate to be a Singaporean.
Without him, we would not be enjoying what we have today.
He gave us Singapore, he gave us all of this. The ability for us to live in here is really thanks to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew.
We've lost a founding father, a father that's been so good to our country.
Some Singaporeans came as early as 7 this morning. This area behind me was set up gradually from 8:30, and since then there's been a steady stream of visitors. It's near lunchtime now, so there's a crowd forming outside the Istana. Some came prepared with flowers, while others brought along personal items that contain special memories for them.
I remember I was about 15 years old, and I do like to attend political rallies. So even though I was quite young, I was eager to go, and I know there was a rally going on in Bukit Panjang Primary School. So I took a bus down, and so I just saw him walking in, and they took a seat behind, and what I did was just went at the back, and I told the security people, "Can I have his autograph, please?" And he turned around and he took the book, and he signed his signature, and he told me, "Be a good boy." And well, here I am to tell the world that how fortunate I was to get this great man's signature.
Others went out of the way to make sure their gifts were appropriate. This man spent 3 hours visiting more than 10 florists near his home. He wanted the flowers to be in the national colours of red and white to honour the late Mr. Lee.
On Wednesday, Mr. Lee's coffin will be placed on a gun carriage and will leave the Istana for Parliament House at 9 a.m.
To facilitate the movement of the gun carriage, some parts of Orchard Road, Bras Basah Road and Northbridge Road will be closed from 8:45 to 9:30 a.m. Motorists may expect delays on the affected roads. Police officers and auxiliary police officers will be on hand to direct traffic. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew's body will lie in state at Parliament House from Wednesday to Saturday. The public can pay their last respects there. Several roads and lanes surrounding Parliament House will be closed during this period at stipulated times.
These include Fullerton Road, Parliament Place, St Andrews Road and Connaught Drive. Traffic delays may be expected along Hill Street, High Street and Northbridge Road. Now, if you're going to Parliament House, you're advised to take public transport.
We're joined now by former Singapore Cabinet Minister George Yeo. He's speaking to us from our studio in Hong Kong. Mr. Yeo was a Member of Parliament from 1988 to 2011 and Minister for Foreign Affairs from 2004 to 2011. Mr. Yeo, thanks for joining us. What is your reaction today on the news of Mr. Lee's passing?
Well, when I woke up this morning, I picked up my iPhone, then I saw the news. So I read it. I told my wife that he's passed away, and then we were filled with an enormous sadness. Of course, we were expecting it. This day had to come. But still, when it came, I think, like for all Singaporeans, memories float through our minds like a torrent. And I think we all felt very sad. I mean, that's because of all that he's done for Singapore and all that Singapore is very much a part of what he made it to be. Of course, he had